Whoa, December was crazy. Reindeer Games Readathon was pretty overwhelming. I read a total of 10 books. I completed a total of 10 books, started all 12 of them, and wow, was that overwhelming. You want to hear more about my crazy reading month? Stay tuned. So, how did I do? I did not finish all of my books, so I read a total of 5,500 pages, which was 1,100 pages short of my original goal of 6,600. But I did pretty well. I mean, considering this is probably the most books I've read in a month in ages, I did pretty well. Books that slowed me down, definitely Rhythm of War at the very end, and House of Chains took a full week to read because that man's writing is so dense. Like, yes, it's only 900 pages. Like, this is it's a chunker. It's only 900 pages. But the font is really tiny. The margins are really small. And I think if you look at the word count, it'd be pretty comparable to a Sanderson book. And his descriptions are intense. Just the prose is pretty intense in this book. Sometimes it can be confusing. For instance, one thing Erickson loves to do is have multiple titles for the same person, and using a lot of those titles interchangeably. And it might seem somebody's talking about two people, but they're talking about one. That can get a little bit confusing, and I had to go back and reread a few things just because, oh wait, that's the same person. Oh, wish I knew that earlier. So that was kind of what slowed me down there. Let's talk about all these books. So these are in no particular order. I just have them all stacked up here, and I'm going to talk about them as I reach over. Guards. So this is my technically second Terry Pratchett book. I have Color of Magic, and I read that a while ago, and I was like, it was okay. Guards was hilarious. The humor is so clever in this book. You have pseudo cultist anarchists, not anarchists, they want a monarchy back. So they summon a dragon, which is like, what? Okay. And you have a human that was raised by dwarves, and he thinks he's a dwarf. It's like Buddy the Elf, but with dwarves. So he comes to the big city to be a guard, and the guards suck. Not really. They're awesome, but in the eyes of the city, they suck. And chaos and hilarity ensues, and there's a great female character in Sybil, and she's not typical at all. Like, a lot of the times you have the two big stereotypes I see with female characters are, hi, I'm only here for a love/sexual interest. That's like one end of the stereotype. And the other is the, hi, I'm butch and I don't need no man, I'm here to kick butt and shoot bubblegum type of female character. There are two extremes. Those are the two extremes that irritate me. Unless they're done well. I mean, actually, the first one can never be done well because it's just frustrating. The second one is most of the time frustrating, but it can occasionally be done well. This was neither. She was a noble, but she was like the most disappointing non-noble noble ever, because she's a dragon keeper. Like, not a dragon keeper, but like a tiny dragon keeper. So she keeps large lizards that are called dragons. She doesn't fit either of those stereotypes. That's the main thing I'm trying to say, and she's a great character because of it. You know, you get tired. I get tired of those two extreme stereotypes because they're very prevalent in fantasy. So she was a breath of fresh air because of that. And thus, she was definitely my favorite character in this book. I don't know what else to say about this. But this was a really, really great book. Next up, Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. We had a glimpse of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's relationship as Master and Apprentice. And I really liked that glimpse. It wasn't a typical glimpse. It wasn't like, oh yeah, we're just going on a mission now. There was real weight to their relationship because of the impending end of it. Because at the beginning of this book, Qui-Gon is offered a position on the Jedi Council, and typically those that are on the Jedi Council do not take Padawans because they're so absorbed with, running the Jedi. That was really interesting to see the strain put on their master and apprentice relationship, because they are portrayed as two different philosophically Jedi. Obi-Wan's very straight arrow and, hey, let's go everything by the book, and then Qui-Gon's like, let's just feel everything out. Definitely would recommend this to any Star Wars fan. If you're a fan of the prequels, definitely read this book because it adds more depth to their relationship. Many Worlds of Science Fiction, edited by Ben Bova, and there's a few other authors in it. Let me list off what authors are actually. So we have Gene Wolfe, Bert K. Filer, Andre Norton, Gordon Dickinson, Keith Laumer, Anne McCaffrey, Robert Silverberg, and Harlan Ellison. I remember most of these short stories, and they were very interesting. I think the one that sticks in my mind the most is the one where there was a it was a telepathic entity that could only communicate by telepathy. And essentially, the human mind is incapable of telepathy except in rare instances. So whenever the alien tried to make contact with the human mind, it made them have vivid nightmares, and in the case of some people, made them have heart attacks and die. So when he got loose in a hospital, that's kind of crazy stories. Like that one's, the vivid descriptions of those nightmares was mind-boggling. I really like this short story collection. It makes me honestly want to read more random sci-fi short story collections because there was so much depth in some of these books, these stories, even though they were tiny. And they really illustrated just like the fiction of ideas that is science fiction, the what if questions asked. Highly would recommend if you can find a copy, because this was published in 1971, and so it does not have an ISBN number, and thus I cannot put any links to it because I can't find it. So yeah, good luck. From what I know, Ben Bova is a really great sci-fi author, and he's edited a few of these science fiction compilations or put them together. So definitely check out his work. I don't know that much about Ben Bova, but am more curious about the name now. Theft of Swords. This was a buddy read for the Shelf Space Discord server, kind of like the unofficial one. It's not going to get a live show. This is a bind-up of two different books, The Crown Conspiracy and Avampartha. I did like this. There was a really nice bromance in this that I've heard gets better as the books goes on. Set in a fantasy world, you have two thieves that get embroiled in, the assassination of a king and get blamed for it, and they have to prove their innocence. Crown Conspiracy was definitely better than Avampartha, which was a very classic, hi, there's a sword in a tower, we gotta get it to kill a beast type of deal, but with a little bit more political conspiracy. Definitely like this book. I'm reading the next two. It has its flaws, but overall I did enjoy the book. Definitely a fascinating world, albeit a kind of a typical fantasy world. So next one I'm going to look at is Poppy War. I've been wanting to read this for a while. I bought this a few months back. This is one that's been making its rounds on BookTube, and the third one recently came out, so that's kind of why it's been like really popular. So I'm excited to get to the rest of the series. It's based off of historical events, and that's what's actually really interesting. So at least one of those genocides happened historically. It's based off of some Chinese history, Chinese and Japanese history. I'm really excited to get into the other ones because the magic system is fantastic. Some of the twists and turns of the book I did predict. Overall, well-built world, consistent magic system that's really interesting. And the next two books, it set itself up well for the next two books, but it's also a decent story on its own. not quite to the level of Mistborn Final Empire in that manner, but it is a very well done story on its own. Organomics. This is a very satirical book, and I loved it. It combines fantasy with trading and finance and some other stuff that was really cool to see in a fantasy world. They had derivatives in a fantasy world. If you don't know what derivatives are, I'm not talking about math derivatives, I'm talking about financial derivatives. You can look them up, but they will make your brain hurt, probably. But seeing that in a fantasy world was crazy, because I'm like, I know what this is and I know how that works. That's really cool. Because, yeah, my finance degree wasn't for nothing. This guy is up there with Terry Pratchett, I think. I think he's a little bit rougher around the edges with his prose, and he doesn't have the crazy wordplay that Terry Pratchett sometimes does have, but it still was a great fantasy book. This book has a great story in it, but at the same time it makes fun of itself. Like, it's making fun of all the tropes, it's making fun of all the quests and all the typical D&D fantasy stuff. The jokes were great. I definitely laughed out loud while I was reading this. This would be a 5 out of 5 stars book if I did a rating system. If you enjoyed Terry Pratchett, pick this up. This is along the same vein, but definitely a different style of writing. I'm definitely going to pick up the second one and the third one when it comes out. I will note, this is also a self-published author. So, if anything, support him for that, because props to him for being a self-published author. Next up we have Memories of Ice. This is by far my favorite Malazan book so far. Great twists. This was definitely the first book where I understood what was going on. And it's a well-contained story. There's still, of course, many, many threads that connect to everything else, but it's well-contained as a book. There's a lot of my favorite characters from previous books in this book, and this is also the book where we get introduced to the dinosaurs that have blades on their arms, which is just so cool, because dinosaurs with armor, with swords. It wasn't something I knew I wanted until I got it. We do get more insight into how some things work and how things are working. This is the first book where everything's really coming to fruition. Stay tuned for a review on this. Actually, I think most of the books that are in this video, I will have a review up for soon. I just have to edit them, and editing Pete is really hating me right now because I'm filming a lot of videos right now. So let's talk about House of Chains. I did like this book. I liked Memories of Ice more, but coming off of Memories of Ice to this was interesting because it was almost an entirely new cast of characters. Most of the ones that I loved were in Memories of Ice. After reading this book, I came off of it, the climax was a bit like, oh, okay. It felt kind of like a deflated balloon. Karsa Orlong, definitely not Karsa Oolong, because he is not a T. He is a great giant warrior that has... Karsa Orlong is definitely the standout character in this. I was confused about him for most of the book because I was like, should I hate him? Should I not like him? There were some payoffs from this book that I missed. So there's one or two things that happened in this book that were set up in other books that I actually missed until I talked to other people. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll keep an eye out for that next time I read it, because am I going to reread Malazan? 100% eventually, because it's so complex, and I'm guarantee you I'm going to appreciate it more on the reread, because that's how people talk about it. This is another book that set up a lot of things, and I think it's great for that, but part of it is I can't tell what it's setting up yet because it hasn't happened yet. I'm sure I'll appreciate it more on the reread though. So, Promise of Blood. This was the Shelf Space official buddy read, and there's going to be a live show for it in a day or two, which is going to be very interesting. I'm excited. I think it was touted for more than it actually delivered, but it was an excellent setup for the other books. And I can kind of tell what it's setting up, because his writing style is very similar to Brandon Sanderson, and it feels like his thought process is also very similar to Brandon Sanderson, but less 4D chess, if that makes any sense. As a standalone, this book was okay, but the magic system was really cool. Powder mages are fantastic and such an interesting take on a magic system. One of two magic systems, I think, that I've read this month that have something to do with drugs. Poppy War was the other one. Or have drug references in them, which was just an interesting thing. I got a nickel for every time this happened. I'd have 2, which is not much, but it's just weird that happened twice. Thank you, Doofenshmirtz. Abandoned Gate. This is one of the 2 sci-fi books that I read this month. Third book in the Expanse trilogy series. It's a 9-book series, so it's definitely not a trilogy. So far, this is probably one of my... I would say this is my favorite. I can't remember what I said, because you'll see in my review video what I said. I really liked the way that this book took the series. It definitely is a sharp left turn from the other 2 books and sets up the rest of the series for something amazing. It also poses a lot of interesting philosophical questions. And of course, Holden is still there. Being Holden, because Holden is plot armor. So yeah, I really like this book. Continue on with the series next month in January. Check out my review when it comes out. So this is the first book that I didn't really finish this month, and that was Rhythm of War. Thankfully, this is a reread, so I didn't quite finish it, but I am continuing it. The reason I didn't finish it is I'm actually taking it kind of slow. As you can see, I'm starting to put more tabs on it and notations, because those help me when I go back and I do my videos on them. So I will be putting out a 5-part series on Rhythm of War that specifically goes into each different part of Rhythm of War and takes it as a context of the whole. I really love this book, and am I recognizing its flaws on the reread? Yes. I think there are several flaws which I will talk about in the different sections, but I still do think this is my favorite Sanderson book so far. Take that as you will. Check out my spoiler talks when they come out. The last book that I started, but did not finish, is Crime and Punishment. Originally, the prompt that I was using this for, the thriller, I was using Anxious People, but sadly that did not come in the mail in time. So I picked up Crime and Punishment, which so far is really interesting. Kind of weird. A horse was beaten to death in a dream, which I don't know how I feel about that yet. Outside of, what? It's a very interesting read. I've been wanting to read this for a while, so Christy Lewis from .cif in Space finally kind of just like, hey, read it. Hey, read it. So I'm reading it now, okay? Really excited to continue reading this. It's definitely it might take the place of Infinite Jest for the next month or so as my kind of like expansion book. I need to find a better way to say that. Like, I don't like that term right now. My heavy book? Maybe that's the better way of saying it. This is my heavy book for the next month or so. And we'll see how long it takes me. So far, I'm doing okay. So, those are the 12 books that I started/read this month. Most of them are going to get individual reviews because I'm crazy. Yeah, so keep an eye out for those coming soon. Eventually, when I can get the editing done, we'll see how much busy season lets me do, because busy season's coming up because I'm an accountant. Please don't ask me for tax advice. I'm not a tax accountant. All of these books are linked down below. So if you're interested in buying any of them, definitely check out the affiliate links. They go to bookshop.org, which is a great nonprofit organization, excellent alternative to Amazon.com. All the profits from buying these books actually goes directly to small businesses around the US. So definitely consider buying books from bookshop.org because it supports your indie bookstores. Have a good night, and I'll see you next time.